Hey storytellers, we're your hosts Ali and Kristy. We're here to tell you sometimes the journey sucks, but doesn't that make for the best stories? Welcome back, storytellers. We're here with you today with a special storytelling episode. So this was actually from our January open mic night, which we hosted at Fonville Press. And the theme was origin stories. So what was your favorite part of this open mic?
There's like too many to name for me, but honestly, I think, again, we just had amazing support from the community. We had Beachy Blooms did some beautiful arrangements for us. We had Brenna Neese doing the photography. Isaac's Imagery did a live stream for us. Let's see, we had, Jared Herzog gave us this pretty much like private performance. He's a local singer-songwriter. He was on The Voice, and he's just amazing. We sang karaoke together in Chicago on this business trip, and I was like, okay, I don't want to follow that. But no, he performs gigs around the beach, and he's just so talented. But that was a really cool kickoff. I would say that was probably one of my favorites.
Yeah.
Getting dressed up. I was like, Ali, we're moving on up in the world.
We've never received so many compliments in one night on our outfits, which just goes to show that if I can never dress myself again, that would be ideal.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that was amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we had Ex Voto vintage out of Rosemary Beach. Shout out Ramsey Stayer.
Mm-hmm.
Picked out like these beautiful dresses for us, and you had like full jewelry too. You were killing it.
I was like, "Can I take this home?"
Yeah,
and she was like, "No,
this is mine now." Yes.
Yeah, I was just like, "You didn't see me take these earrings home."
How diligent were you with recording what we took? No.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and then our featured storyteller, we had Ku Carell, 5-time Grammy Award-winning music producer. Splits his time here in Los Angeles. He started Paradise Recordings, has worked with, Rihanna, my girl, Beyonce, Cardi B, Justin Bieber, Lorde, Katy Perry, Sting, Mary J. Blige, Cher. That story was insane.
It goes on.
Talking about him recording with Cher in her bedroom. I was like,
that was definitely one of the highlights.
That's a bucket list.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the stories that this man has is just, we didn't even scratch the surface, but listening to him talk was definitely an incredible experience.
Yeah. And just Fonville Press out of Alys Beach, just beautiful setting. That hummus plate.
Yeah.
Still dreaming about that.
Yeah, it was a very special open mic night for sure.
Yeah.
And then the way that everybody responded to the theme origin stories, just we had stories of people's adoption stories. We had stories of people rediscovering, their inner child and how that reflects on like their upbringing and their actual childhood. And then we had mine.
I was going to say, and then Ali has always figured out a horror spin. Hey, what a lead-in. Why don't we let's listen into yours.
Yep. Let's take it away.
Okay, so I think it's so funny because tonight's theme, like I just said, is origin stories. But if you guys have been to one of these before and you know me, I have a tendency to write horror stories, kind of for whatever theme. And I get up on the mic and I'm like, this fits. But kind of how I saw it is that it's sort of like a callback and a hallmark to, sitting around a campfire and kind of calling back to, the beginning of storytelling, everybody coming together, telling stories and learning something new about each other. And one of that is the introduction of a character and then the building of that character to a solid conclusion. And I love horror, and that's kind of how I've always seen horror stories and horror movies. And that's what I thought of. And the whole point of a theme is that you're supposed to interpret it for yourself. And this is how I interpreted it, which I don't know if that's like a cause for concern, but anyway, without further ado, the town of Boyette, Florida was built on rum, cocaine, and stolen Native American land. Boyette has a population of less than 5,000 people and consisted of a couple of trailer parks, a few diners and dive bars scattered about, and a downtown that had a couple strip malls filled with pawn shops, beauty shops, and cash for gold places. There's also a Motel 6 on the edge of town where the cleanest thing there are the roaches. Me and my family were part of that population of 5,000. My dad dipped a while back whether he was still out buying cigarettes or was actually in the belly of the crocodiles that lived in the swamps that surrounded this town remains to be seen. But that just left my mom in our family's trailer, raising all 6 of us. Understandably, I moved out as soon as I could. Growing up, I had only 2 friends. Elliot and Adam Benoit were twins and were inseparable. Both had fiery red hair, both with tanned almond skin, dark eyes, and both have lived with their grandparents in the spit and mud shack at the very edge of town, right next to the swamp, since they were babies. The local lore is that their papa was lost to a fishing accident, and their mama went crazy, searching every night in the neighboring swamps looking for the body, until one day, she just never came back. Because you do not go searching at night in the South Florida swamps. Despite this, Elliot and Adam were happy kids growing up in a loving and supportive household with their grandma and grandpa. Collard greens and buttermilk biscuits were plentiful, and I'd often wander in with my nose in the air, sniffing like a stray cat about to steal somebody's lunch. They'd feed me and then herd us outside where we'd play for hours underneath the scorching sun. And what else is there to do in a deadbeat, 2-bit swampland town like ours than go fishing? That being said, I hated fishing. Couldn't stand the feeling of hooking the worm. On the off chance I managed to catch something, I'd quickly hand it over to Adam, who was more capable than I of filleting the fish. I much preferred the camping trips instead. Once a year, the entire Benoit clan would gather in the outskirts of our little town for a weekend of relative debauchery. We'd go hiking and fishing during the day, and when the sun finally set, Grandpa Benoit would recruit the boys to build the world's largest bonfire, just shy of something uncontrollable. The Benoit bonfires were a local tradition, as were the scary stories told around the flames. Grandpa Benoit would wait to go last, as nothing could top his story about the tooth fairy that lives in the South Florida swamps. He'd wait until the sun was set, the flames were high, and the whiskey was running thick. It was the height of summer in 1970, he'd start dramatically. I was hoping to enter the local fishing competition, and I had spent every spare minute of my time practicing my technique in the local lakes. The competition was stiff, and the lakes were unusually quiet, so I waited until later in the evening on the day of the contest to head out. There were 3 of us, and we headed out on Ricky's boat in hopes of catching something. We entered the swamps a little over that way. He pointed a little to his left, and sure enough, there was a small opening in the thick canopy of pond cypress trees. It was quiet on the water. Ricky kept trying to make jokes to break the tension that was building. I still wasn't catching anything, and frankly, I was ready to turn back. We were deeper in the swamp than I'd ever been, and just one false turn. Grandpa Benoit smacked his knee. We'd be lost out there. But Ricky refused to turn back. Said he was catching a damn fish. Said he wasn't going to lose his competition due to any redneck, hillbilly superstition. Grandpa Benoit shook his head. You see, there's a saying around these parts. The fire crackled in his paws. Don't take what the swamp doesn't want you to have, or you'll lose something you love. It had been 5 hours at this point, and me and Jean were ready to go home, but Ricky wouldn't go. Not without casting one more line into the water. And despite our arguments, he dug into that bucket of worms, hooked 2 of them, and threw the line out far. There it sat, floating gently in the water as the water rippled faintly in the moonlight. Then suddenly, it bobbed. Ricky went wild. He was yanking on that line, but whatever it was fighting hard. He tried to get me to pull it up, but I wouldn't touch it. Then suddenly, the fighting stopped. The line went slack, and suddenly, something drifted to the surface. Grandpa Benoit paused. It was a doll, a small porcelain, dark-eyed, black-haired doll. The doll was beautiful, Grandpa Benoit. Eyes started to look a little misty. I remember thinking how sad it was she was in the water. He paused. That's when Jean grabbed my shoulder, hard. His eyes were wild and terrified, and he was saying something about how we needed to go, now. Jean grabbed the wheel from Ricky and started pulling the boat around, but we didn't make it 2 feet before we hit something hard. The jolt nearly threw us overboard. It tossed all of us to the floor, and our fishing equipment went everywhere. Ricky's expensive fishing rod went overboard, and cursing, he grabbed the light and shined it on the water where it had fallen. Grandpa Benoit leaned back, his face thrown into shadow. Goosebumps crawled up my arm. "You see," he said, "there was something else in the water." "It was a woman," he whispered. "That's what we hit." She was almost totally underwater. The only thing we could see was her eyes, and she was looking up at us. I heard Jean whispering, and I looked back. He was muttering the Lord's Prayer, and I had noticed he had wet himself. Then I heard something else, something faint. Ripples in the water. She was drifting closer, her dark hair fanning out behind her. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I couldn't do anything as I watched her put one pale, bloated hand on the edge of that small boat. Grandpa Benoit put his hand up. The boat rocked violently, and once again, we fell to the ground and watched as slowly the other hand reached up too. The thing was pulling itself up. Sitting on the floor of the boat, at first all I could see was the top of her head, then her forehead, then those dark eyes. Then we saw her mouth. Grandpa Benoit paused, looking at us. Her mouth was like an open wound, extending down into her neck, but in her mouth lined rows and rows of teeth, like a shark's mouth, but filled with teeth of slightly different sizes, colors, and shapes. Nothing matched. He paused, and then I realized it's because they all came from different human mouths. "Teeth," it groaned. "Give me your teeth." Around the campfire, nobody took a single breath. Then bam! Grandpa Benoit howled. "She took my teeth." His dentures flew from his mouth and landed on the nearest shrieking child. He had a full set of fake teeth and loved pulling them out, much to the dismay of Grandma Benoit. The campfire erupted into a chaotic hullabaloo of shrieking, screaming children. Grandma Benoit started rounding them up, and the rest of the adults sprung into action too, gathering up the children that belonged to them. I watched the chaos as it erupted around me with a smile on my face. Grandpa Benoit told this story every year, and while I knew how it ended, I couldn't help as a small shiver raced up the back of my neck, like as if, from the depths of the darkness around me, there were eyes watching my every move. Yeah.
Next up, we have Mary Elaine Long.
I'm Mary Elaine Long. I am a Southern humorist and a writer, and usually when I get up here, I tell a story. I'm much more comfortable telling than reading, especially my own work. And my origin story is about marriage for me. And I had it all planned out. I knew exactly what I was going to say. And then this afternoon, I was doing some work, and I found an old story, one of my old columns. I used to write a piece called Bless Your Heart for Good Grit magazine, and I wrote that for several years, and this is a piece that I had written about marriage, so I'm going to read, so y'all give me patience because I'm not that great at reading. So here we go. Counting save the date notes, there are currently 7 weddings noted in my calendar. 7. And more interesting than the number of weddings I've been invited to are the people who are getting married. You see, I've reached an age in my life where my friends aren't planning weddings anymore. Their children are. Their children. I mean, how on earth did this happen? Am I not still 22 years old? Did I not just get married months ago myself? No matter how I may feel or what ways my mind tries to trick me, the truth is I am old enough to have friends whose children are getting married. And it's terribly fun. Young love, starting a life together, it makes me smile. And I can't help but wonder what all of their stories are. How did they meet? How long have they dated? Where did he propose? All of those thoughts have taken me back to the year I met my husband, and my memories could not be more dear. My face sometimes starts to glow just from the thought of that wonderful summer 30 years ago. I moved to Birmingham to help some family friends with their children, and I also took a job as a lifeguard at their country club where he just so happened to be a member. when he walked up to me on the pool deck one afternoon and asked if he could sign up to be a guppy, in other words, a member of my 7-year-old swim team that I coached. And then he proceeded to tell me that I was just like Wendy Peppercorn on The Sandlot. It was love at first sight. We were engaged by July, and after a quick scan of the Alabama football schedule, we set the date for November. When I went home to announce I was marrying a 29-year-old man and that I had only known him for 2 months, and also I'm not going back for that last semester of college, my mother was elated. To be clear, my parents had obviously met him several times. He did ask my daddy's permission, and he was told, if you think you can do anything with her, have at it. But marriage, this was another animal altogether. I was in love and couldn't have cared any less about the wedding. I wanted to get married in the sweet little hometown church where I was christened, where I taught Sunday school, and sorry to the parents of those children, by the way, and where I learned to love the Lord. Other than that, I couldn't have cared less about any of it. I would have married him on the steps of City Hall if it wouldn't have killed my mother. I think about our wedding day and all the days since, and I find myself wishing I could share the things I've learned with all of these young couples. I want them to know that marriage in real life is not a scene from a Nicholas Sparks novel, not even close. Sure, you'll have those wonderfully romantic moments from time to time, but they are far from a day-to-day occurrence, especially as the years go by. The best way to sum up my thoughts on marriage is with a quote from one of my most favorite old movies, the 1968 classic Yours, Mine, and Ours, starring Miss Lucille Ball and Mr. Henry Fonda. Mr. Fonda's character gives a wonderful speech about true love, and he says, "You want to know what love really is? Take a look around you. Take a good look at your mother. It's giving life that counts, and until you're ready for it, the rest of it is just a fraud. Life is not a love-in. It's the dishes and the orthodontist and the shoe repairman and ground round instead of roast beef. And I'll tell you something else. It's not going to bed with a man that makes you say you're in love with him. It's getting up in the morning and facing the drab, miserable, wonderful, everyday world that counts." Talk about hitting the nail on the head. I must confess, there are days when the trips to the orthodontist and the shoe repairman can start to wear on my nerves. And sometimes I would like to burn all of the laundry and load up my dogs for a move to a desert island. But when push comes to shove, I would do every last bit of it all over again. And even though I would oftentimes like to hang him up by his toenails, and today is one of those days, by the way, I will gladly eat ground round with him any night of the week, maybe with a little nice Cote de Rhone, and I wouldn't change a single thing. So thank you.
Next up, we have Brian Matos.
How's it going, y'all? First of all, thank you to Ali and Kristy for setting this up. I just moved here like a little less than 2 years ago from a annoyingly heavy writing community where everyone was like a poet or an actor or something. So I really appreciate like finding a group to be able to share what I spend like all my time doing. This is a poem from a collection I've been writing for the last couple of years called Apotheosis, which is about his like origin story as it gets. Yeah, this is called I Do Not Exist. I do not exist. I am neither of light nor of matter. I am of the wingless and the meek. I am of the lambs, those wandering totems lost in the cluelessness of sleep, blind to the inevitable sun. I was awoken by the sirens of the shepherd, bellowing from the distance with the ringing chime of the herald, come crying before the crowned, who arrives charming, with hands held high, roaring out the coming of his kingdom, the summons to the flock of the earth, paving the long stone road to lead us obediently home. I do not exist. I am of the shining morning star, the immortal empire of spreading light, slowly stretching our conquest through the long eons of distance, dead before we reach you, like the knowledge of history, whose empire is time and reflection and myth, and in those early days of culture on Earth, gave stories to be told around the night-fearing fire, to be whispered in the glow of the cold, dead moon. Stories of the red-white sun and the gifts of its thriving heat, who was the giver of brightness and was the first son of myth, born from the mothering darkness, that nascent womb, the pulsing void, and was the first to slay the father of ancient chaos, that base and savage god of entropy, which was the state of the universe before energy took up the hammer of existence and, in striking the empty anvil of nothingness, drew forth the first spark of living light. And yet all of this has little to do with my contempt for the Almighty, nor the waves which spread out in the wake of my own wingspan, regardless of its stunted breath. This is a conclusion. This is the sum of the parts, the equation and the quip, the question and the allegory, the logic and the myth. This is both motif and overture. If we are to choose between the army of an absent god or a body tied to the lifetime of the earth, then I will remain. I'll stay rooted to this dust which gave me the need of a name and allowed me whatever speck of a long dead spark to accumulate into me. I do not exist. I am of neither light nor of matter. Thanks. This is a much shorter piece from like another collection I've been writing for, I don't know, a lot longer than I'd like to admit, 5 or 6 years. And this piece is called A Tombstone, and I grew up in a similar beach town to this, like a lot of commodity and money and like summer folks. And as I've gone back over the years, I've always gone back for a wedding or a funeral, like almost always, and I always see the change of the landscape with the loss of friends. So this is just a short poem that sort of like ties those two things in together. I'm still trying to save this place for the sake of its history. In the sanctuary of my memories, I hold its ancient form like a time capsule. In the collective heart of localism, some idea lives on like a dream, like a forgotten future thriving in the windswept chaos of an uninterrupted wild, where the coastlines are untouched by the madness of consumerizing scenery. I sang the song while you learned the chords out of nowhere. You're amazing. You died in a place you loved, curled comfy on the floor, catnapping again. I walk around in a daze, reading minds with the eyes of a lunatic. They see the grief etched into my face like a scarring, furrowed with the aggravated worry of mourning. I can't remember if we said I love you the last time we called, or just hung up, never knowing you'd slip away like an ember floating into the emptiness of the wind. Thank you. I just wrote this the other day. This is just a love poem, or an honest and realistic love poem. There's a new moon singing in the window like a subtle sign the season means to quiet. Its tune is rolling like a shanty, it's silver and sad. The melody chimes into the visions of our sleep with sweet scenes of daybreak, the easy closeness of early love, flashes of the future. Outside, the night's chirping creaks in the starless dark, hiding its hooting in the rustle of the wind, which rattles little fears with a tap, tap, tapping, drawing us fluttering from slumber quickly into wide-eyed fear. And yet dawn breaks, and you watch it bleed into day with the quiet, and you watch it bleed into day from the quiet of meditation. And you've known what it is to break your back in the tensions of transfiguration, shifting your shape in the vacuum of a dying star. I've known only tiny worlds raging around like a fire caught in glass. And so I've lived rugged. I've seen years pass with the eyes of a wanderer, free of house and home and loving kin, and I've known the speeding expanse of climbing winter mountains, and I've drifted in on a final wave right to the shore. And yet, every morning is better with you, every sunset warmer. The truth is, contentment is elusive in the face of entitled expectation and the shadow of grief, now so constant with the fate of my restyling. And while the search for happiness has faded with the arrogance of youth, and I've bred this defensive closing of my heart made guarded in the wake of suffering, still the little things matter. Those fluttered looks across a public room, the tiny wars we fight with tickles and bites and specifics. And though prudence remain now hidden in the lore of old wives, smothered in the foggy sagacity of common wit, I've never ignored the insight of the age-old idiom, nor this absolute. Wisdom exists regardless of its vessel or the container in which it's found. I've asked before, and I will again, how is the gull so of the earth, the sea, and the sky? And in how many colors do the eyes of my lover shine the brighter, so like the changing ocean, now blue, now green, now shifting gray? When, if ever, will the shocking beauty of the moon not remind me so truly of her, whose countenance imparts her wisdom with the flicker of a flaming crown, flashing about her brow with a whisper from the judgment of her heart, which she holds out on guard as the very tool of her warfare, waging evermore against the forces of valuelessness. Thank you.
Next up, we have Madison Shirley.
Brian, you should have let me know everyone was wearing black because I would have rocked the turtleneck. I feel a little bit too colorful now. It's okay. All the Colorado art is flowing from you. We'll take the Pacific Northwest and pack that into it also. Thank you all so much for being here as well. I don't have as many beautiful poems as was just right here in front of me. I will say that I had the pleasure of talking with Ali and Kristy about 2 months ago and got the heads up of what this theme was, and of course finished it this morning at 6 a.m. instead. So we'll see how this goes. Hopefully that you are okay with it also. Because one way or another, that I have started this piece about 9 different times and I have never finished it. It's changed topics and themes and rhymes each time with every line, and I could not define what was wrong with it. Each piece told a part of my heart, but it was always unfinished, unpolished, and sharp. There was no beginning, no middle, no end. It was just the beginning, again and again and again. And how can I tell you a story of, tell you a journey of 1,000 steps if I take the first but not the second? And that, also, how is it that I can tell a story with start at the beginning and go till the end, and when you come to the end, you stop when I can't reach the middle? What is it that leaves me doubting myself, my story, my art, and my craft so much that I can't continue? So I sit and I think, and I'll admit I drink, but the truth is not one that I always want to embrace, so instead I procrastinate. I will do anything, I think, to not finish this piece, to not put pen to paper. Hell hath no fury like a woman procrastinating on a deadline she doesn't want to meet. Never have I been so productive at work, nor my house so tidy. I swear the baseboards are gleaming and sharp, and the introvert in me is screaming for socialization that I know is draining. And I feel I destroy myself just to finish this piece because I cannot bring myself to admit that I can't complete it. I never learned to finish things. I only learned to start. I don't know the satisfaction of a job well done, just the rush of the new one. My projects lay unfinished. My paintings are half done. The excitement is in the shiny, the glittery and new, the unknown opportunities that are found on page 1 and 2. But past that, once you get past there, you've lost control. The story tells itself through you, and that act gets really old. I cannot finish this piece, and many more. It's like an ellipses on my heart, waiting evermore for the next line or rhyme that just won't come. And sometimes you sit, you think, and you drink, and you just have to close the book and admit when it is done. Thank you all.
Next up, we have Jessica Plowden Anderson.
Hi, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Jessica Plowden Anderson. Woo! I started That Girl Media last year as a video production company, and I moved to the area over 10 years ago. I moved here from Los Angeles, which is so ironic. That's a whole nother story that I won't get into, but that's where I was raised, and I went to college. And I know we all have our origin stories of why we came to 30A, but I'm not going to tell you that story tonight. No, I'm actually going to share with you guys something rather cathartic for myself. So sorry, this is kind of selfish in a way, but it's something very personal, something very vulnerable, and something that is not commissioned, which as an artist, any artist in the room, is like super exciting when you do something for yourself. Give me a whoop whoop. All right, and so this is really huge, okay? I have always known that I was adopted from Romania. Ever since I can remember, my mother always told me that I was born in her heart. In fact, I know the story of the exact moment that my mother decided to adopt. She was watching Barbara Walters on 2020, and Barbara was doing a special about the Romanian orphans. And for those of you unfamiliar with your Eastern European history, I'll summarize. Before the Romanian Revolution in 1989, the country was communist and ruled by Nicholas Ceausescu. Back in 1966, he actually outlawed abortions and birth control in an effort to raise the low birth rates in Romania. And he even went as far as to reward and offer special treatment to women who had 5 or more babies, right? But these women, they didn't really want to live up to that kind of standard, right? And that led to a massive amount of child abandonment and a growth in children in the orphanages. Now, when Barbara Walters was doing her special, she showed American families that were going to Romania to adopt. And my mother, watching this special, who had struggled with fertility, saw the special and thought, I could do that. And so she did. My parents raised me in Los Angeles, California, and offered me every opportunity a parent can offer someone. I had a really, really good childhood, right? But for me, something never quite clicked with me and my parents. I was different. Not just appearance, but something much deeper. I was always a performer, the artist, the outspoken, the risk taker. My mother was a high school math teacher, and my father was a computer programmer. So there's no apple tree analogy here, but we all come, the apple always falls from the tree, right? For a while now, I've struggled with admitting the desire to explore who I am and where I came from. I've had the feeling of lacking connection on an ancestral level with someone. I've had feelings of being constantly misunderstood. I've had feelings of abandonment. Why wasn't I good enough to keep? This past December, I was visiting Los Angeles, and my mother, like always, brings me a box of things from Romania for me to go through, okay? And it's always filled with stuff, but this particular box is something that I'd never seen before, a lot of items that I had never come across. And in that box, there sat an art book. And it caught my eye, right? There was actually an inscription on the front page of that art book from a woman named Eva, who actually knew my birth family and actually was the woman that took me to my foster home in Romania, where my parents picked me up. It is in Romanian, but I did translate it, so here it is. For Elena, that was me, when she will be old enough to understand, she is born in poems land, story land, and arts land. She must know a few things to make her understand that although her destiny has changed, her roots remain in Romania. And that got me. I was like, but there was a second piece of paper in there that also got me. It was actually it's a little bit of a timeline of when I was born to when my family came and picked me up from Romania. And in that, it explained that I, was born in the hospital in Tulsa, and I was actually in the hospital for 10 days before Eva had taken me to a foster home for about a month. Then, this is what got me. I was then given back to my grandmother, it was the mother of my father, and she had me for 10 days before Eva had come and picked me up to take me to the foster home in Bucharest, where my parents came and got me. 10 days, right? What really caught my eye, because this is a lot, right? So what really caught my eye was that my birth mother's name was on there, and something I had never known before. I had never known. It said Maria Oprere, born in Constanța, and that she had a couple of brothers in Romania with families. My eyes welling with tears of both joy and pain. Eva's inscription kept rattling in my brain. Her roots remain in Romania. I flipped through the book, all in Romanian, of course, so I couldn't not read it. But a name popped out on the page, and it said, Peter Oprere. It was the same last name as my birth mother. Coincidence? I want to say no. So I Googled him. Right? He was a published author, an art critic, an artist. And for the first time, I feel seen. I feel a connection to who I am, and knowing where I came from impacts the person who I want to be. This is not only a story of my birth story, but it's a story of my rebirth. Thank you.
All right, now we've got Jennifer Howard up to the mic.
Hey, I'm sure this needs to go down. Can you guys hear me okay? Well, now for something completely different. That was so powerful. The whole origin story thing stumped me. So I went back to a series of essays that I had published previously, and I rewrote it. So it is meant to be read by a person sitting silently, not by me standing up in front of you guys. And I feel it will probably lose a little bit, so be patient. Okay, that's all the disclaimers. Anybody else have any questions? Lower it. Okay. Closer. Hello. Thank you very much. All right. The origin story of U.S. travelers' bad reputation. Best I could do. American travelers don't have a stellar reputation overseas these days. And by Americans, I mean U.S. citizens. The ugly American trope of the tacky tourist trying to speak another language by either speaking ever more loudly or mispronouncing the English words with what they consider the local accent is one we all know well. These characters, or perhaps caricatures, seek out a McDonald's as a first stop in a foreign country. They complain the beer is hot, the hotel rooms are small, and taxi drivers who don't understand English are rude. The inability to communicate or communicate properly in a foreign language could leave even those Americans who truly want to understand another culture guilty of perpetuating Americans' poor reputation abroad. In fact, many travelers make a concerted effort to learn the language of the country they visit, emboldened by hours on Duolingo and armed with Google Translate. They plunge right in, heedless of subject-verb agreement, proper pronoun gender, and local slang. Yep, people like me. It's true. I have brought about grave misunderstandings and triggered multiple obscene hand gestures when making an effort to speak the language of a country I have visited. Look, I'm no dummy. I took Spanish 101 and 102 to satisfy my high school graduation requirements like most other fine citizens of our 50 states. Whatever Spanish I might have learned or recalled from Senora Lopez's fourth period class was no help at all when I traveled to Brazil, where the dominant language is, unfortunately, at least unfortunately for me, Portuguese. A few days after I arrived, I was thrilled to spot an open market in the park just outside the apartment where I was staying. Eager to prove that I could handle shopping for fruit and vegetables in a foreign language, I darted downstairs into the busy market. Emboldened by my strong Spanish language background and the time I spent on my iPhone on the flight south muttering after Duolingo, I plunged right in. I managed to purchase some flowers, flores, without incident. But then I saw the melitons. To a native Orleanian such as I, finding melitons is light years better than finding a McDonald's. For those of you that don't speak the mishmash of languages, Nikhil, you probably know what I'm talking about, melitons. For those of you who don't speak the mishmash of languages that form the lingua franca of the Crescent City, a meliton is not a tall hat worn by hussars in the 18th century or a eunuch flute. Don't believe everything Google tells you. A meliton is what some people call a chayote or alligator pear. It's a mild squash-like vegetable, pale green and shaped like a pear. In New Orleans, the gushy interior is mixed with shrimp and seasonings to make a tasty, savory dish. By tasty, I mean high caloric. By savory, I mean spicy. The vegetable stand where the melitons were piled in a meticulous geometric pyramid-type display was watched over by a largish man with a beard wearing a stained white apron. He regarded me suspiciously as I walked to the front of his stand, beaming at the melitons. No doubt, I stood out in the crowd of cooks and uniformed housemaids, or maybe it was because I was clearly so excited over a vegetable. It's difficult to say what with cultural differences and all. Bom dia, I said, with all the confidence of someone who knew at least 50 words in Portuguese. That means good day, so far so good. I was equally confident that I knew the word for meliton. Now, out of the many helpful words and expressions I might have learned, I am not sure why I glommed on to Peloton, but food is important, right? Smiling my best non-ugly American smile, I said, "Eu quero xixi, favor." Before I go forward, does anybody, you must speak Portuguese. Yeah, okay. Eu quero xixi, favor. I want Peloton, please. Not exactly fluency, but it should have gotten my message across. The man behind the vegetable stand came out and started saying something very quickly that I didn't have a prayer of understanding. Clearly, he just didn't understand me the first time. I tried again. Eu quero xixi, favor. This time, to make sure he understood, I pointed to the carefully stacked pyramid of green melitons. I wasn't getting through. Maybe it was my accent. The vegetable stand proprietor raised his voice and started making motions that looked like he was trying to shoo me away. This wasn't good. A few of the other shoppers had stopped and were watching. At this point, I felt I really had to make an extra effort to bridge whatever cultural divide was causing this misunderstanding. Eu quero xixi, favor. To make my point even more easily understood, I pointed to the precariously stacked vegetables. Aqui! The reactions of the group of onlookers varied. Some laughed a lot, others appeared angry. The vegetable stand guy stuck with angry. His voice grew louder, vigorously making the point of whatever he was saying. He literally, although relatively gently, pushed me away from his stand. I stepped back, and he went back to the shooing motion. I can take a hint. This was clearly a cultural misunderstanding I could not untangle. I tried my best to keep smiling as I wound back through the market toward my apartment building. Holding the flowers over my face helped. A little later, I knocked on my landlady, Cecilia's door. She was completely fluent in English, although Brazilian, having apparently had a much stricter language education than had I. I recounted the situation at the open market to her and was dismayed when she too vacillated between a horrified expression and laughter. "Oh my God," she said, "the word is shoo-shoo, not she-she." She was gasping with laughter. "That's not so different," I defended my language skill honor. "You'd think he would have figured out what I was saying." Whoops, what'd I do with this? Oh no, she finally wound down from howling laughter to uncontrollable giggling. She means to urinate. Only it's a word a little child would use. Like pee-pee. You were telling him you wanted to pee-pee on his vegetables. And sadly, that's one of a series of essays of the ways I've screwed up in foreign languages.
Next up, we have Jay Lyles to the mic.
My name is Jay Lyles. I've actually read one of these before, or two of them before, one at Sowell House. Dave's here, and it was nice for him to host, so that was really great to be part of that. Then also at Distillery 98, and that was one of my first readings, and I know Harrison and Kristy, and then Mike Ragsdale was speaking that night, talking about his book, Holier Than Thou, his graphic novel. And I thought, like, well, this is going to be the best place for my story, called Jay's Shitty Car. And it was really to try to tie in everything that I do with my life. And I'm pretty optimistic, even though it's talking about a shitty car, it's a pretty happy story. And it's really been hard for me to verbalize through the years, and really I just try not to verbalize when I get a lot of questions of, like, what do you do? Where do you live? You know? What's the other one? It's like, are you religious? And then so, and like, you know, and I can check some boxes so we can just like move on to the next thing or ask them a question. And I love listening to people's stories. So, you know, I can check some boxes and entertain, like, hey, this is what I do. What do you do? And man, I love listening to all the stories. I grew up in Mississippi, so you learn to be a great storyteller there because there's not really anything to do. You're hanging around the same 7 people, so you have to tell the story 7 times. And then if an 8th person shows up, you go like, oh, you got to tell them one about the raccoon. I'm like, okay. But you have to make it just as exciting for the other people that have heard it 7 times already. So, and then in Mississippi, really what you do is what I tell people, like, what do you do in Mississippi if they move there from out of town? Is that really the only thing we do is like we eat food and we play sports and then make babies that eat food and play sports. And then we tell stories about it. And I was like, that's what we do. So this past writer's night was origin stories. And so once again, I'm trying to tie in everything that I do. And a lot of it can be explained if you knew me when I was little. And it was like, oh yeah, that makes complete sense that he would end up doing what he does. And so I'll just kind of start. And then at the end of it is that I have a little a cappella song that I wrote. And then don't want to give away the title, but just we'll sing it for you. It's a very short kind of melody thing. But anyway, origin story. And it's like, where do you live? What do you do? Are you religious? And then like the question that you like don't really get as you get older is like, what do you want to be? They just kind of assume what you are, but you know, like, what do you? So, but like you get that question when you're a kid, you know, just like, what do you want to be? And so, starting when I was in preschool, I came home and I told my mom, I go, Mama, I got friends. And she goes, this is what I remember because you came home saying friends with 3 syllables with your little hick Southern accent. And, you know, and I was just like, but I was so pumped because I had friends. But both my parents were from Tennessee. I was born in Knoxville, but lived in Mississippi from the age of 1 to 22. So a Southern accent was always around me. But I was pumped because I was coming home from preschool that day because I had friends. Then, while I still had my cute little hick Southern accent, a question I got in elementary school was, if you could be anybody in history, who would it be? I thought about it for a little bit, then thought, none of them, because they're all dead. They didn't do anything great enough to keep themselves alive. I don't know how I'd want to be them. But then I thought I would like to be their friend. So starting elementary school, I knew that I wanted friends. I liked doing that. I wanted to practice being a friend. I wanted to know what it was like to be a friend. So I've spent most of my life just trying to be a friend. So I would want to hear what they were thinking about, what they wanted to do, be sad with them if they were sad, encourage them, be with them on adventures, or sit quietly while they sat quietly, and always happy to hear one of their stories. So I didn't want to be anybody in history, or even be in a history book myself, but what I want to be is a friend. And so part of the last story that I had read, or the first story that I read, was Jay's Shitty Car. Was trying to tie that all in. I had a friend read it, and I was like, who was his son that we met that day? And he had told me, but I'll read the part of the story that I had completely forgotten who it was. Batteries die and tires go bad, but Jay is not worried, nor is he sad. Jay's shitty car's tried and true, but sometimes it dies and the tow trucks come through. But Jay does not think he is out of luck because Jay makes new friends whenever he is stuck. The tow truck man tells Jay of his son he's got a college football scholarship and he can really run. And I let my friend read that in Mississippi. We're on a flight from Houston to Tucson this last fall watching his daughter play in a national soccer tournament. So very proud of her. And I said, who was that? Like, who was his son? Because he was a senior in high school, and everyone was coming after him. It was Cam Akers. It's Cam Akers' dad. And then so if anyone keeps up with pro football, I mean, he's a professional football player now, Cam Akers. So I was like, no shit. So I'm like, that's cool. I'm going to have to write that in and tell people. So, and then also it's like I go everywhere. And then people were like, people are like, where do you live? Where are you from? I remember getting that question as my Southern accent kind of started going away a little bit, and I still have it, but it wasn't as thick as it was before. And then people in middle school go, "Where are you from?" I go, I'm from here. They're like, where are your parents from? They're from Tennessee. They sound like you. Yeah. But then I was just kind of like, okay. And then you start getting the question of like, well, where do you live? Which can be a really fun conversation. But what I really want to tell people is I live everywhere. But that can turn into an interrogation really quickly. And if you knew anything about me in middle school, my parents let me walk around Disney World, all 3 parks by myself for the entire day when I was 11. They're like, you want to go by yourself? Sure, go ahead. And I was like, okay. So I went to this arcade where all the games were free, and then I went to Honey, I Shrunk the Audience 3 times, which is like a ride that doesn't even exist anymore. And then I went to Space Mountain multiple times, and I can't remember all the rides. And I took the tram between the parks. I'm 11. And then like the next year, I had a friend that invited me to come to Montana, but I was playing sports in Florida, and my parents got me a ticket to fly by myself at the age of 12 to Montana. They're like, yeah, sure, you can go. Here, get on the plane. And then so when I end up in Tucson or Italy or something like that, you're like, why do you do that? And I'm like, well, I mean, I had a friend, So, and then another question I get too is, are you religious? And my answer has always been, I remember first I got it when I was in San Diego, and I write songs that have religious connotations to them. And so people, after I get done playing, I'll be like, are you religious? And I would say, not in the way you think. And they sit there and I go, I don't do things because a book told me to, or because someone else, a person told me to. I do it just because it makes sense. So it's like I put myself in situations to increase the chances of good things happening to me, and I take myself out of situations to decrease the chances of bad things happening to me. So it turns out there is a book that, that I would practice those things even if I couldn't read it. But I don't do it because the book tells me to. That stuff just makes sense to me. I was like, oh, that makes sense. I don't do drama and I don't do bullshit, and this is great. So I'd written a song that, it's kind of like when people ask you, and maybe they still do when you have people that are close to you. And the best part about being a friend is that you never have to verbalize yourself around a friend. You can really just sit in their presence. Or if you try to explain something, you go, hey, man, you don't have to explain that to me. And so I have so many wonderful friends that have always encouraged me along my way. And they're like, and it's always like, I'll hold your beer, man. Like, send it. And so this would be really cool either way. Either it's going to be spectacularly good or awful. But either way, I'm watching. So this is a little song that I wrote, and I'll close with it. And I do appreciate your laughter and your encouragement as I go along my way with Jay's shitty car. But here's the song. They ask me what I want to be when I grow old. A lawyer or a doctor or a person that builds homes. I look at them and say what I want to be when I grow old. I want to be a beautiful soul. A beautiful soul can move mountains. A beautiful soul can part the sea. A beautiful soul can see the truth of what a person wants to be. So what do I want to be when I grow old? I want to be a beautiful soul. Thank you.
On that musical note concludes part 1 of our January Storytellers event at Fonville Press in Alys Beach, Florida. Check back next week for part 2, which includes our featured storyteller for the month, 4-time Grammy Award winner Cook Harrell.
Thank you for listening, storytellers. Wherever you are on your journey and whatever brought you here, we encourage you to tell your story. Tell lots of stories. Now get out there and find your stage.
The Emerald Coast Storytellers podcast is produced in partnership with Sowell House, whose mission is to house creative culture by supporting the individuals who shape it.
Follow them on Instagram @SowellHouse or visit their website, sowellhouse.com, to learn more.